Well, good afternoon if you are in New York City or London or Paris or Milan or Athens, Greece, or Kea in Greece or anywhere in Greece. Greetings to people all over the world, especially those of you who are affected by war and strife. We want peace. We want peace for all sides, for all peoples. It's something we have to learn and reinforce every day. Music, and especially opera, teach us about human conflict, but also teach us about reconciliation. The best operas do that, including an opera we're going to talk about a lot today, La Vestale. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. Today is another installment in the series that I've been doing in late 2023 about the life and legacy of Maria Callas, whose birth in New York City on December 2nd of 1923 is being celebrated in these days. And my guest today is Stefanos Koroneos. As you can tell by the name, he's Greek. And central to our conversation today will be Maria Callas in Greece, or let's put it another way, the Greek Maria Callas. And Stefanos, welcome. Stefanos, I'm sorry. I'm used to speaking in Italian, so I say Stefano, but it's Stefanos Koroneos.
Actually, you got it right. It's Stefanos.
Stefanos.
Yes,
but
we have the stress on the first syllable.
That's fine. I've heard everyone talk about you saying Stefanos.
Yeah, I mean, they get it wrong, and I'm used to that.
Okay. Well, good. My instinct was correct then. Stefanos Koroneos.
Stefanos Koroneos is right.
Stefanos Koroneos is the general and artistic director of a company that I've known for a long time and think very highly of, that we're going to talk about as well, the Teatro Grattacielo. We'll talk about that later. It's very dear to me as a company. And are you still artistic director of the Camerata Bardi?
I am.
Would you describe that first?
Yes, Camerata Bardi is Teatro Grattaciello's Young Artist Program. We thought to give that name because it has a very big significance. It's significant for us. It's practically our young artist program. I
know why it's significant for you, but you please describe why it's significant.
Oh yeah, historically in Camerata Bardi, that's where opera started
in Florence.
In Florence, that was a group of illuminaries, artists, scientists, etc., who decided to put music into words, and because that is something that resonates with us. The fact that opera is not only sounds, but it's also words put in music. We thought that this title would be very appropriate for our young artists.
And this was 1597 in Florence.
Yes.
The building is now a hotel.
Sadly.
Where Maria Callas was born is now a medical school. At least it maintained its original characteristics. But let's go to the very beginnings of opera. Opera was created by, you called it the Camerata Bardi, it's also known as the Camerata Fiorentina, a group of men only at that point, who decided in the late Renaissance in 1597 to create a new art form. They were inspired by antiquity, which is to say Greek and Roman antiquity, to take all the ancient arts, so theater, poetry, music, dance, visual arts, lighting, decor, all of that, and to combine them to create something called an opera lirica, a lyric work. Opera in Italian means work. And this opera lirica would be not just one of the old art forms, but all of the old art forms synthesized to something new. It was taking the words and then setting them to music. Most of the original opera liricae were based on Greek stories.
Yes.
And therefore, the idea was to evoke the great Athens, the great antiquity, the writings, the philosophy, the arts of ancient Greece, which in Florence, which was known as the Athens of the Renaissance, were upheld and glorified. I can say that I think they didn't succeed initially because they didn't understand that this new art form was not just a combination of the old, but was something new. And the first opera was 1597. It took 10 years, which is not long. 1607, Claudio Monteverdi came along from Cremona to Florence, and he tried to explain to them that this is what you have to do. The music has to evoke the meaning of the words and the sound of the words simultaneously, and that will take the story to a different place. He didn't meet with a happy reception in Florence, so he went elsewhere. He went back north to Mantova and then to Venice. And his first successful opera that we know about is Orfeo, the Orpheus myth from 1607. Then he did Roman subjects. He did suddenly forget it, the Odyssey. Forgetting the name of that opera, Il Ritorno di Ulisse in Patria, the return of Ulysses to his homeland. So Ulysses. And then he did Incoronazione di Poppea. He did many, many other operas, but they're all lost, or we only have fragments of them, like the Ariadne myth, the Arianna myth. But Stefanos, no, I didn't get it right.
It's okay, don't worry.
Would you talk to me as a man who is Greek, but who has also been immersed in Italian culture, about your experience growing up and your first contact with the classical arts, which is to say ancient Greek art, and then the classical arts being Italian opera and Renaissance and post-Renaissance art, how you experienced them as a young man and your attraction to these art forms?
Yes, gladly. So I was born in Athens a few years ago, but I grew up in a very rural place in Greece called Mani, which is in the south of Peloponnesus. It's a place that it's very ancient, full of ruins, full of castles, full of because it was practically pirates' land until the 1900, etc. So I grew up in a culture that it was full of history. Together with that, a thing that I always remember is that I had a very big photographic memory that helped me to remember details of every ruin that I had ever seen around in the area where I was living, in a town called Areopolis, that means City of the Winds. It's a very small town, medieval, so that was the first interest, the first pictures that I got as a kid, and that's the pictures that I remember mostly of all. It was pictures of history of Greece. Together with that, I got an interest in ancient Greece first, and in design. So when I finished high school and I decided to move to Italy to become a designer, and my idea was to do preservation of artistic history in Greece or in Italy. Things went totally another way. And I finished up actually becoming an opera singer, and I never finished.
Let me ask, where in Italy did you move to?
Milano,
okay.
In Milano. And all of a sudden, I was an opera singer and with some pretty important contracts. So I never finished my designing school, my university, and I went into totally something else. That said, I lived in Italy for a very long time, and I was immersed completely in the Italian culture, especially the Italian culture of the South, because I was very often in Rome, in Florence, and in Sicily, a lot in Sicily, for work, but also for pleasure. And that's when the first time, for example, I remember when I went to Bari, I felt like I was in Greece. I felt like home.
Yes.
Uh, Sicily, the same thing, Agrigento, all these places. And it was obviously, great for me because it was like food for my soul, but also
Mhm.
food for my photographic memory. So the fact that I have always lived the world, my whole existence is based on pictures
Huh.
that I remember. And I might not remember your name, but I will remember every detail of anything that is around you, including your face. So that was my first exposure to those two cultures that started very, very early, and that is what I have been living with until today.
Let me fill in something for our listeners. Many of you know that a lot of my life's work is dedicated to Italy, to writing books about Italy, teaching about Italy, living in Italy, fortunately. And southern Italy, which is the region of Campania, Calabria, Puglia, Apulia, sometimes called Basilicata, sometimes called Lucania, and Sicily, is a region known as Magna Grecia, Greater Greece. And in ancient times, these lands were occupied by Athenians, by other Greek peoples, depending
Yes.
where you were going. And that's a whole very complicated story. And Greek culture and Greek agriculture and Greek art and Greek design, one finds all over southern Italy. And a lot of them look like people from Greece. And Naples was Neapolis, new city. And it was under a volcano, and the soil was so fertile there, and wine grapes grew in profusion, and all kinds of wonderful foods grew there, that they created something called an enodotto in Latin, which is a wine duct, not an aqueduct, which is water, but a
Mhm.
wine duct. And the wine would flow down from the hills to the harbor in Naples, Neapolis, and they would fill amphorae with wine and ship them back to Greece, because even then the wine was better in Italy than in Greece. Everything else was wonderful in Greece,
I
but
agree.
the wine was better in Italy.
I
And
agree.
so that these cultures interlock. And my favorite city probably in Sicily is Syracuse,
Mm-hmm.
which was one of the most important cities in Greece, even though it was in Sicily. And when you do opera in southern Italy in places like Taormina in the Roman theater or the Greek theater, or many other places, there are Greek temples and theaters that you find that are still active today.
Yes.
So there's a very profound link. And even though the nations are now different nations, excuse me, in ancient time, Magna Grecia, Greater Greece, was all of that. And gradually, the Roman Empire, based in central Italy at Rome, overtook a lot of the lands of Magna Grecia, and the Greeks were defeated. And then we see Le Troyen and the story of Carthage and Aeneas proceeding to Rome, and we love all that. But people, whether writers, whether opera composers, people such as Hector Berlioz, many, many others, were fascinated by ancient Greek culture and ancient Roman culture. An opera like Mozart's Idomeneo or La Clemenza di Tito are works set in Greece, set in Crete in this case, and in Rome. They sometimes get mixed together because the gods have similar behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
but they have different names. Neptune, Poseidon, for example. And Wagner, of course, was so influenced by the stories of these gods that he transformed them into the ring cycle along with some Nordic gods. And this really is the heartland of ancient European culture. This Greece, southern Italy, and then later Florence and Venice and northern Italy, Genoa for particular reasons, Milan for the commerce, for the silk trade, for design, as the home for 25 years of Leonardo da Vinci. So architecture, building, engineering, all of that came from ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So when people go to high school in Italy, one of the options that they have is doing what's called Liceo Classico. and in Liceo Classico, they have to learn ancient Greece and Latin, Greek and Latin. And many of my friends are fluent in ancient Greek in Italy, which is rather remarkable. But the belief was that you have to read the texts of antiquity to understand who we are. And believe me, we're going to get to Maria Callas, I promise, but I think that a lot of what we're talking about relates to who Maria Callas was. How did you wind up in New York and then at Teatro Grattacielo, which we will talk about in a moment?
So I was living in Italy, and I lived in Italy until 2004, and then I was working with Franco Zeffirelli on a production of La Traviata at Bolshoi. It was his famous Traviata from Busseto with the plexiglass. I was the Baron.
I know it well.
Yeah, yes, and there I met my ex. I don't sing anymore. My ex agent Bob Lombardo, who told me, well, you should maybe think of coming to New York. And together with that, in the same time, I fell in love with the person that I finished up marrying, and all together, this happy combination brought me to New York City. But I have always had a very big interest about arts administration. I would see myself, because my brain has a very logical part that wants to analyze and organize everything. And so I started, I got my first gig with Teatro Grattacielo in 2006 or 7. And there I developed a friendship with Dwayne Prince, who became a very good friend. And secretly...
Who is a woman, although her name is Dwayne, but she's a woman.
Yeah. Yep. And now she lives in Palm Beach and she drinks martinis on the beach with her sister. So
I drink olive oil on the Upper West Side.
Listen, whatever you keep going. And I started, I told her that, I would like to help her so that I could learn that part of the business because I thought that it interested me greatly. And until 2019, who was her last year, that's what I did secretly. Nobody knew that I was helping her as an assistant. That moment, her health was not at the best. And she spoke to the board, and the board said, well, we need to do something, or we are closing, or somebody will continue. And that somebody became me. That right now I'm bringing the company I brought the company from being completely a concert performance company to something in the middle, but with more performances than one. I'm trying to keep her legacy while I'm also developing this company to become something a little bit bigger.
So I'm going to speak to what the name Teatro Grattacielo is about, because I do know that. Yes. In Italian, grattacielo means skyscraper, which New York City has many of. Stefanos, you may not know about me that a lot of my life has been lived in and near Genoa.
Oh.
In Italy. And therefore, I know the origin of the Teatro Grattacielo, because during World War II, the Teatro Carlo Felice in Genova, a wonderful theater, wonderful theater, was very badly damaged. Mm-hmm. I've worked in that theater a lot. The auditorium largely saved, but the stage house was just ruined. It's right in the middle of Genoa near the Palazzo Ducale. It's heaven. I love Genoa. I love that part of Genoa. And it was not until 1992 that the theater was fully rebuilt. It now has one of the largest and most modern stage houses in Europe and can share productions with Paris and New York, other theaters that may be more famous, but it was for a long time one of the biggest stages in Italy.
Right.
And in 1992, I know people have mixed feelings about Christopher Columbus, but that was the 500th anniversary of his first sailing for Spain, but he was a Genoese. And very close to where Columbus's house is said to be is a cinema in one of the first skyscrapers to be built in Italy, called the Grattacielo. If you only have one skyscraper in a city, you call it the skyscraper. And there was a cinema at the base of the skyscraper. Now, it's not very tall. It's maybe 20 stories tall, but in the Genoese skyline, that's tall. And in the absence of an opera house, most operas were done in the cinema, in the Teatro Grattacielo. And I did a lot of work there in my time. And it's wonderful. It's not ideal for opera, but the fact that Genoa, like Milan, like most of Italy after World War II and the destruction, one of the first things that most cities did was reopen their opera houses. Milan did that on May 11th, 1946, with Toscanini conducting Renata Tebaldi. But all over the country, it was a very important gesture. But Genoa's opera house, the Teatro Carlo Felice, was so badly destroyed that they really couldn't do that. So therefore, they opted for what became known as the Teatro Grattacielo, the skyscraper theater. And we'll get to this later, but Maria Callas sang in the Teatro Grattacielo. A lot of people, even in Genoa, I think most people don't know that, but she sang there because she did sing in the Carlo Felice, sort of, but not the theater that it became, because she was already dead more than 15 years when it reopened as the modern Carlo Felice. So, having said that, Duane Prince, who founded the Teatro Grattacielo in New York, very cleverly understood her history, but also understood that New York, the city of skyscrapers, that was the perfect name for an opera company that specialized in doing Italian works from mostly the late 19th, early 20th century that had been lost or not done. Composers such as Zandonai, Mascagni, their lesser-known works, Leoncavallo, all of these composers who may be famous for one work, but did many others. You can probably name more composers, but that was the tradition. And every year there would be at least one performance that all the opera lovers in New York would go to, and we'd make a point of being there on that night. We put it in our calendars because we wanted to discover the latest Montemezzi's L'amore dei tre re, all of these operas that are wonderful masterworks, but somehow with the enormous shadow of Puccini at the beginning of the 20th century in Italy, these other works have been forgotten, unjustifiably forgotten or ignored. Now, this leads to the fact that the other night, or like a month ago now, October 28th, you put on a performance of Spontini's La Vestale. La Vestale opened La Scala on December 7th, 1954. It was not done that often. As an opera, you need a great singer to sing the leading role. Rosa Ponzel did it at the Met in the early years, and artists of that stature, but not often. You didn't see it very often. Renato Scotto did it in concert around 1970, but it doesn't come around often at all. This was a very famous role for Callas that you can talk about. It was the first time she worked with Luchino Visconti, the great director of film and also of opera, they really developed an understanding of one another. Visconti's romantic partner and assistant was a young guy named Franco Zeffirelli. He went on to work with Callas. I was an assistant to Zeffirelli in the 1970s and early 80s. And so we learn from the people who we work with if we ask the right questions. And now I'm at the point where I still ask a lot of questions and I'm still learning, but I like to share what I've learned. And that's part of what this series is about. So why La Vestale?
So first of all, I must say that, it's a little bit of a Greek pride because 100th birthday anniversary of Maria Callas. My brain right away went into honoring her in some kind of way. But I had also to think of the mission of Teatro Grattacielo. Teatro Grattacielo has as a core mission not only to promote young artists in big stages in New York City, but also to present at least once a year a rare masterpiece. So I did a little bit of research, and I was thinking what I'm going to do that Maria Callas sang and is not been done so often. Metropolitan just did Medea, so that was out of the question. Did last year La Fedora, so that was also out of the question, and we did it also 3 years ago. So I started listening to La Vestale, and my reaction was right away. I just loved the score so much, and the fact that those recitativos are totally a blend of Italian declamato with classic recitativo, which was something totally new, at least back then. It sounded to me, I'm sorry if I'm saying something terrible, as like glucose steroids. And
Yes.
yeah.
Well, Gaspare Spontini, the composer, who, by the way, was from near Ancona, so that would be Ancona. The name was originally Greek origin. It means elbow because the port of Ancona, forgive me if this looks like a bad Italian gesture, is shaped like this. Right. So the ships in the Adriatic could come into the safe port of the elbow, as the Greeks named it. And the region is the Marche, which later became part of the Vatican lands and so on. Ancona and the Marche was not quite Magna Grecia, but it was close enough to it. And it's on the Adriatic and therefore facing Greece, facing Illyria, the old names for those countries on the other side of the Adriatic. And so for that reason, it had the right flavor, and he understood that. Christoph Willibald Gluck was famous for what are known as the Gluckian reforms. It does not roll off the tongue very easily, but the Gluckian reforms were about reining in what he considered the excess of 18th century bel canto, with a lot of diva personalities and a lot of flourishes and showing off the voice rather than honoring the story and the music. And so the reforms, I believe, were intended to refocus on the music. Callas did a couple of Gluck operas that are among my favorite of hers. It was in French, Iphigenie en Tauride, which became Iphigenia, Iphigenia in Tauride, at La Scala in 1957, and Alceste at La Scala in 1954. And therefore, she understood the style, and she reined in, not that she was a Handelian or Mozartian type singer, but she understood the declamation. She understood that there's an intensity to this reformed music that is as compelling as hearing a singer show off everything she can do. But this was just at the dawn of bel canto in the early 19th century. So you had Donizetti, Bellini, and Rossini giving singers all kinds of wonderful things to do, but where they showed off their voices. Spontini connected Gluck to what came after, which to me is Hector Berlioz, primarily in France, because La Vestale premiered in France, even though Spontini was Italian. It premiered in Paris, and in a way led to Wagner, because Wagner was very influenced by Spontini. Wagner never gave credit to anyone, but he conducted La Vestale himself in Dresden in 1844 at a time when he was working on Rienzi, which is set in ancient Rome. And I think a fair case could be made that had Spontini not done La Vestale, Rienzi would be very different in style. In a way, chorally, some of the what we hear in the choruses of La Vestale lead to Tannhäuser, Rienzi and Tannhäuser, early Wagner in 1845. So that's my digression. But Gluck, absolutely. On steroids, perhaps.
Yes. So yes, that's the whole idea. And I was very interested mostly about the recitativos. Obviously, we chose obviously the Italian version because Maria Callas sang it in 1954 at La Scala. And when I opened the score, the first thing that I noticed was that the Italian translation by Giovanni Smith, was had a lot of challenges because the way the recitativos were translated from French to Italian was a little bit over elaborated and not so easy even for Italian speakers, for people who actually speak the language very well, such as myself. So I decided to tackle upon it, and together with Christian Capocaccia, the conductor, who is from Rome, and prepare a whole production that was mostly, concentrated around the preparation, the musical preparation of the singers for this production, that for this masterpiece, who has almost like an oratorio. It's very static. It has an oratorio feeling, and we wanted to stay true to that instead of going crazy doing a production with 1,000 things that are more distracting than what the original intent was.
Thunder and lightning and stepping into tombs and coming out of tombs and all
Yeah.
that.
We thought that this production, was it was better if it was presented in a very simple way, oratorio way, and giving a lot of emphasis to the recitativos that Maria Callas loved so much, because let's be honest, there was nobody like her, or maybe there are few people obviously like her that can deliver words and colors within the words like she did. That's why I thought, okay, maybe it's a departure from Verismo style that Teatro Grattacielo has been presented until now, but it's not such a huge departure, because always we have in the Italian declamato that is kind of close to what Verismo requires, which is the use of the word.
Could you give an example? I'm putting you on the spot a bit by speaking the Italian of what you mean by declamato style.
Yes, declamato style is when a singer sings "O numi, o giovi, o montagne, o foreste," and there is all this declamation, constant declamation that cannot live through vowels, but has to live through consonants. Because the consonants become as much important as the vowels. That maybe is not the same in more bel canto-ish operas, where you have to sound fantastic and you have all these cadenzas where you can show expression through the beautiful use of your vowels, of the o, the a, the e, etc. And that was the first day when we started rehearsals. To every singer, I told them this thing: I want you to keep it thinking that Italian declamato is absolutely not the same thing like normal bel canto recitativo, and it's all declamation. Hopefully,
there is in Italy, in theater and film, a certain love, I think it's too much love, for what's known as the histrionic style. And
yes.
A very famous actor, Vittorio Gassman, who was born in Genoa, very handsome, he knew it, very good actor, but he was known as Istrione, the histrionic one, and that was said as a flattering thing. In a way, he was like Charlton Heston, the way he would intone the sounds. And every night at midnight on the Italian network, you would have 5 minutes of Vittorio Gassman reciting Dante. And it's a wonderful thing. Imagine if in America we had perhaps 5 minutes every night of American classical authors like Twain, like Poe, like Toni Morrison, where we had 5 minutes of people reciting, but speaking in real language. But you would tune in at midnight to hear Vittorio Gassman speak mezzo cammin della nostra vita. And he would look in the camera, wear a black turtleneck. And yes, it was very compelling, but it was not natural. Right. And I think that what Callas, Maria Callas, and certain other kinds of actors, singers, performers understood was that I'm going to call it, maybe other people have used this term, a heightened naturalism.
Hmm.
In other words, you're not calling attention to the fact that I can speak like this,
Yeah.
but you use that to create a character or to inform or to elaborate a character. And so that if she was reading the letter from Macbeth, Nel di della Vittoria, she read that in a way that was both declamation, but also you can hear her taking in the information that Macbeth is relating in the letter. And Teneste la promessa from La Traviata, when she's reading the letter from Germont's father,
Yes.
you kept your promise. Nowadays, when you have singers do that, they really either run through it because they can't speak the Italian, or they overact it. And at the end, when Violetta says, "E tardi," she has no breath left. And Callas says it, I think, correctly. "E tardi," she's tired. Now singers scream, "E tardi," at the end of that. And it's just all wrong. It's just really wrong. And I think that
Right.
her dramatic instincts for text, for music, were, I don't use words like best, but almost infallible. Everything she did had a heightened realism, a believability, no matter what the character was. And so you could take the most implausible stories, but when she did them, you cared, I believe. And I only saw her once when I was 9 years old, so I'm not the judge at all. But we have this recorded legacy that I'll be talking about in a future program that makes us create in our minds we become stage directors in our minds, and we picture what's happening if we listen very closely. And in preparation for today's conversation, I listened to La Vestale by Callas. I, of course, attended your wonderful production on October 28th. I believe, and we should say this now, you're doing it in Greece soon.
Yes. Yes.
When and where?
December 8, 9, and 10, it's a collaboration with Megaron in Thessaloniki, which is a very, very beautiful venue in the second city in the north of Greece. This is going to be more of a full production. By full production, I mean we are together with technology and with some sets, etc., and full costumes. We are creating a bigger show. With Marcelo Alvarez as one of the tenors, Jose Bros is the other tenor. Indra Thomas is coming to Greece. Alexia Vulgaridou is going to be the other Julia, the first Julia of the first cast. Marco Spot is going to be the bass. We have a whole cast of superstars. And the whole idea is, again, to honor Maria Callas.
Who's conducting?
Philippe Rousseau.
Okay. And say slowly, carefully, the name of the theater for people who don't speak Greek.
Megaron Thessaloniki.
Okay, so it's in Thessaloniki, the second largest city of Greece after Athens. Megaron, Megaron.
And yes, bravissimo, exactly.
Okay. All right.
There is one in Athens, and then there is one in Thessaloniki. Both of them belong to the state. In other words, think of Megaron like the state theater that has a season, a classical season, together with other things.
So that's very important indeed, and I wish I could be there. I have not been to Greece for a few years. I go a fair amount, and I would love to go back. I have to say this because people who follow me on social media know this already. You said you are from a place called Mani, Mani. The store that I go to most in New York City for buying my food are two brothers who are from Mani.
Oh.
And their store is called Mani Marketplace.
Oh, I have to check it out.
They produce their own olive oil, and they bring it from Greece. And this is the most delicious olive oil. I use it in my Italian cookery. I use Greek oil.
I'm taking notes.
697 Columbus Avenue on 94th Street.
697 Columbus. Wow.
Yes, and they have herbs from Greece and Greek honey and so on. And to look at it from the outside, it's not remarkable to look at, but inside are all of these treasures. and they
Thank
bring in
you.
Moscato grapes from southern Italy and all of these delicious things where you have to know to look and to ask. And the brothers are Tasso and Taki, and they are
Mm.
from Greece, from Mani, and that's what's called the Maniot Peninsula, Mani Marketplace. And I would not have brought that up had you not said you were from Mani, but you
Yes.
didn't.
It's okay.
So,
It's great.
yeah.
I love it.
Um, Now, what I'd like to do is go back to Maria Callas's time in Greece. For
Mhm.
people who don't know, and let's see if I can do this from memory, her she was conceived in Greece, I suppose in 1923, because she was born December 2nd, 1923. Her father was George, was a pharmacist. Her mother was Evangelia or Litsa, who
Mhm.
was from an island called Kea, Kea. Kea, for those of you who know your food, is the home of Aglaia Kremezi, the greatest Greek food writer in my view. And she has a farm and an orchard and a vineyard and everything on the island of Kea. So Kea is historic in terms of its being a nucleus of Greek culture from a gastronomic point of view. Um, Her father and mother married in 1916, and in 1917, in May, they produced I think in May, they produced a daughter named Yakinthi, and they called her Jackie. In 1920, a son was born, Vasily, and he sadly died in 1922. And that had a profound impact on the marriage. And by the way, remind me, because I don't remember, something happened in Greece in 1921. Was there any historical event?
1921 or
Yeah, I know
18?
1821 was a big
Yes.
year, but anything in 1921 apart from the centennial? Okay. All
No.
right. Um, so, and the parents were really shook up by the death of their son. And they conceived Maria, who was, they traveled to New York. Maria was born on 106th Street and Fifth Avenue in New York at what is then known as Flower Fifth Avenue Hospital. It's now a medical school. And her mother, frankly, wanted a son and was
Yes.
disappointed at having a daughter and didn't really look at her daughter. And it was a very difficult relationship between mother and daughter. Maria grew up in New York City until the age of about 13, when her, or maybe early 14, when her mother decided to go back to Greece. And her sister, Jackie, had already gone to Greece in 1936. The father said, I'm staying in New York. And therefore, Maria went back to Greece to join her sister and her mother. The relationship was difficult. She presented a lot of singing talent right away. She was already singing big performances at the age of 15, starting with Santuzza, of all things, from Cavalleria Rusticana in Athens in April of 1939. She encountered a teacher, a Spanish woman, Elvira de Hidalgo, who was hugely influential in Callas's formation, became like a second mother. And Maria Callas lived in Greece, in effect from 1939 to 1945 throughout World War II. And she sang many roles, and she sang a lot in Greece at that time, learned Greek because she was not a Greek speaker, absorbed, and I'm going to ask you, Stefanos, to talk about this, Greek culture, what it means to be Greek, formed her connection to her ancestral
Right.
homeland where she was conceived but not born. But at the same time, missed her father. This is very Greek in a way. It's like Electra. And
Yes.
thought of her father a lot. And when the war ended, Maria sang several performances, including in Thessaloniki. I can't pronounce that word, Thessaloniki,
Thessaloniki.
to raise money to get back to America. And she got on a ship by herself, the Stockholm, as a young woman, and sailed back to New York to reconnect with her father and to try to build a North American career. It didn't work out very well. And she then came back to Europe, and I will be covering this in another program, and arrived in Italy, in Verona first, and then Milan, and all that happened that made her an international star. But in very important formative years in her life, including the beginning of her performing career, that was in Greece. And would you, from your point of view as a Greek gentleman who spent a lot of time in Italy and lives in New York, in other words, the male Maria Callas,
Yeah.
would you talk about how Greek she was, and in what ways was Maria Callas classically or unclassically Greek?
So one thing that I think Greeks and Italians, that you know so well, have in common is that they are very proud people. Because of the history, because of who we are, because of where we come from, and the rich history of this country. But also, it is not only connected to the history itself, but also it is connected to the grounds, to where we have been born, and also to the language that is so full of nuances and so rich. So that is the characteristic that I think Maria Callas had most of all, had created, had developed throughout her childhood, that that part of being very proud and stand in her own ground. Together with that, even though I never really met her, but I have talked extensively about her with Franco Zeffirelli. We used to have breakfast every morning in a hotel in Moscow and talk about her. It was the fact that she was very proud of being Greek. This is something that obviously was very, very, very prominent, even though sometimes was upset because we all have upset feelings about our country when it doesn't support us the way that we think we need to be supported. But in any way, that she was very proud, and the most important thing that I recognize in her. The most important Greek part that I recognize in her is that sense of pride that she has, and the fact that she was propense for tragedy. Which, when you go to Greece and you talk to a couple of Greek ladies or older Greek generations, you will figure out that we are born in that country, in that terra, so we are propense to think a little bit more, over the top tragically, and to express ourselves in the same way.
I was talking to a woman here in New York recently. She's not in opera in any way. She's in the medical field. And we were talking about psychology and behavior and so on. And I said to her that one of the many things that I love about opera, and by extension Greek theater, and Shakespeare a little bit, is the fact that tragedy exists and tragedy is explored, and the human condition, which regular television, most cinema, most films, most theater, modern theater, doesn't go to classic tragedy. Whereas when we read and study and watch Greek plays and certain operas, certainly, these are real tragedies. And I mentioned at the start of this broadcast that my thoughts are not just my thoughts, but my actions are with people all around the world who are in some way victims of war, engaged in war. And I'm not here to take one side or another, but there's an ugliness about the way on all continents of the world, not just in the famous ones, where people kill one another for ideological differences, for perceived wrongs that happened 1,000 years ago, for pieces of land that belonged to my huge ancestors and so on, rather than finding ways to live together and in peace. And I think that opera and Greek tragedy gives us an understanding of why people still behave this way. They may not articulate it, but we feel it. So that when I listen to a recording of Maria Callas and become a stage director in my head of what she's doing, or when I hear Christine Goerke singing Electra, when I hear any number of artists, Sandra Radvanovsky doing Medea, when I hear these people connecting to these tragic heroines, you understand that they're not being divas, prima donnas, throwing their hands or upset. This is about life. And Greek theater and some operas give us the opportunity to connect to that. And I think, in my view, I would think that Callas, living in Greece during a war where there was hunger, where there were bombs exploding, where things were being destroyed, where the German Nazis, the Italian fascists were occupying parts of Greece, it must have left a sign. Anyone I've known born in the 1920s who was in Europe, who witnessed war, or people, my father was born in 1923, who were in the military, they didn't always talk about it. I had an uncle who saw horrendous things in World War II, but he wouldn't talk about it.
Right.
But I know that they marked who he was in many different ways. If you see tragedy, if you see these horrendous things that humans are able to do to one another, unless you're completely optimistic in a blind way or you're in denial, you understand that. And I think that something about modern art and culture tries to prevent people from those experiences. Everything has to be meaningful, relevant, spiritual, when, like it or not, the big human emotions, the tragedies and the comedies and the love stories are bigger than what modern art makes them, in my view. And so in my view, it would have to be the Maria Callas living in Greece from 1939 to 45, and then coming back to New York City, which was booming and thriving in 1945, especially. It must have marked out the person she became. She sang her first Tosca in Athens at the age of 18, which is astonishing to me.
Incredible.
That, I mean, number one, vocally, but, she sang Santuzza when she was 16 or 15 even. She sang Leonora in Fidelio, a great political opera, 1944, in Athens. It's an opera about liberation. Works that we don't associate her with. She sang for the only time in her career, Suor Angelica, about a woman who loses a child, which later became significant to her in her private life, and enters a convent. When I say loses, she has the child out of wedlock, enters the convent, and later learns that the child has died. And Senza Mama is what she sings. She sang Norma in 1960. She went back to Greece at Epidauros. She sang Medea in Epidauros in 1961. So these great roles that are filled with tragedy, filled with drama, filled with the kind of emotion that most singers can enact or perhaps connect with and understand. I profoundly believe, and you tell me your thoughts, that it was informed by her wartime experience in Greece.
Absolutely. I agree with that, and I want to share with you that I really feel her pain, because Maria, like many other people that experienced back then in the Second World War and every war, they found themselves from a life situation to another life situation, which was totally different. And I can also talk about my family, because I come from a family that before the war was a very important family in money, and we found ourselves after the war, when my grandfather was killed, without nothing. My family I grew up extremely poor for that reason. So it was a shock, not for me because I grew up in that condition, but my father and my aunts grew up with the stigma of being something and becoming something else from one day to the other. So I'm pretty much sure, and everybody knows that Maria Callas also, when she was young, she went through extreme poverty in Greece. They had to do anything they could to survive. And definitely this is something that signed her. But most importantly is people like her kept their sense of pride alive in a way or in another. And if you go and you analyze all these characters of all these women, heroines that she sang, yes, they were tragic, but also they had a big sense of, should I say proudness? Of pride, a big sense of pride, and that's when she gave the best of herself.
Yep. I'm going to ask you this as a man who works in theater and opera, as a man who's Greek, as a man who has studied, obviously, ancient Greek theater and culture and so on. What is the place, and is there a place for tragedy in art in our contemporary life?
There is a lot of place, because those stories, if you analyze them and you look at them without the conception of being written such a long time, are actually actual stories. Because the stories, the tragedies in another form, under another name, are repeating itself until today. For example, take the story of La Vestale. She becomes a priestess of the goddess Vesta because her father doesn't want to give her away to that guy that is not of the same social circle or level as him, and therefore his daughter. And how many of these stories we hear every day of women being given and promised to men that they don't want, even of a very much older age. So those stories are actual stories, and together with the fact that they are beautifully written, and when presented the right way, they can easily understood from everybody. They are also very actual, even though they're not.
I want to go back to La Vestale even more. There is it's called in opera a scena, a big scene in the second act, which is sort of central to what the whole opera is about. It's a very long scene, and on October 28th, when I attended La Vestale, the audience kept wanting to applaud. Now, I understand why, because the singers were great. Tu che invoco con orrore is the name of the scene, but it goes on at quite a length. And it must have been a surprise to Paris audiences back in 1807 or so, because, yes, before that, Mozart would have 9-minute arias and Handel would have big scenes, but this really goes on. And it evolves to different emotions in the course of the scene, and action happens, but not the kind of action that requires a lot of acting, but just action, transition, emotional transition, decisions that Julia, the character, makes, things that the let's call her La Gran Vestale, the big old mezzo. Right. Your artist was not old; she was young and very beautiful, but the sort of like the mother superior of the Vestal Virgins, and what she comes to inform, and then the arrival of a man, and so on. But when you're staging this kind of scena that requires, and obviously the scena became the basis for mad scenes in Donizetti and Bellini and so forth, and then longer scenes, very long scenes in Wagner and Berlioz, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying this is the very first, but it's one of the prototypes. Gluck had them before. And it requires a different kind of acting, a different kind of singing, but a different kind of listening and participation from the audience. When you were approaching staging this production, how did you approach the scena in Act Two?
Okay, that's a very nice question, and I'm happy that you're asking me this, because that was one of the things that I insisted so much from my actors those days. I told them that in Greek and Roman tragedies, there is a certain staticity that doesn't mean boring. Not doing too much and using your face and your voice to express has a certain power that comes comes easy to every great artist. So what I was hoping to do is to exactly mimic that style that is very old. That it's all based on the capacity of an actor, of an actress, or a singer to evoke, to tell the story through his voice, but without doing what classically opera singers do, but to leave maybe to do throughout the whole scene maybe one or two gestures that they are very significant, that something happens, but other than that, to really concentrate in what Spontini wanted to express in this scene, but also in this opera, through his very particular style and through his very particular writing, especially through in the recitativos and the scenes when there's not an aria, so we don't have the melody to follow. And there are some actresses from the past that they did. They were great in Greek tragedies, like Katina Paxinou, Irene Papas, who were able to stand still for 20 minutes, not move at all, and deliver an incredible. I'm talking about that, and my me viene la pelle d'oca. I don't know how to say that in
You're getting goosebumps.
I'm getting goosebumps. Yes, nothing, just 20 minutes, and just how you deliver the text. Obviously, opera is a little bit more complicated because you don't have only the acting part, but guess what? You have the rhythm, the conductor who needs you to go in a certain tempo, the musical pitches, the voice, the vocal capacity of delivering high notes, low notes. So it gets a little bit more
complicated. Hot lights.
Yes, the hot lights.
Ooh.
The crazy director who tells you don't move for 20 minutes and just all of a sudden put your hand up there. So that was my idea, because I think that this, I strongly believe that this opera doesn't need too much.
But to an audience member, and there that night, as I said, everybody wanted to applaud all the time.
Right.
This is New York, where we applaud a lot, which is a nice thing.
Right.
But it did not comport with the style and aesthetic of this particular opera.
Right.
And the singer stood there and heard the applause, and then they kept going, or the conductor kept going, Christian Capocaccia.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, no one said it was boring, because I think that this was an audience that was educated. But I can imagine that audiences elsewhere, if they watch someone standing completely still for 20 minutes, would say it's boring, there's nothing happening.
Right.
And this is our modern visual age. You said to me at the beginning of our conversation that you are very visually oriented. And I come from the belief that the more you look, the more you see. So if someone can stand still for 20 minutes, you can see a lot more 15 minutes on than you did at the very beginning, if you're really looking, if you're paying attention to the face, to the costume, to the small hand gesture, to the lighting, to the perspiration on the brow, to whatever. There's a lot to see. But we're not trained to do that. We're not really trained to see, to observe. We do see. We're not trained to listen, we hear. And this kind of engagement, which I call pleasure activism, is not something we do in modern times. And I think has changed the way opera is staged. And I asked myself whether a Maria Callas today would encounter, if she behaved and acted as she did 60 years ago, would encounter the same kind of reception, or whether the acting with the voice was so extraordinary that it wouldn't matter. What do you think?
I think it wouldn't matter at all. I think she would have the same success today too, because audience perceives the difference. And I mean, she might have to have a strong social media presence too. So,
and I would argue, I don't think she would want that.
Yeah,
I cannot picture her writing LOL and posting pictures of
No,
rehearsals at
no,
the
but
Paris
probably she
Opera.
would have somebody doing it for her.
Yeah, I think it would remove some of the mystique.
Right.
And part of what we have with her and with certain people nowadays,
Mm,
I'll pick someone I like, Catherine Deneuve, the French actress who's about 80,
ah,
has a lot of mystique about her.
mm,
Yes, she does make public pronouncements, but when she does, we take them seriously
right.
because they're not necessarily what we expect. Her
Mm,
politics are across the spectrum, they're not left or right. Her attitudes about women and women's behavior, relationship to men, is not proto-feminist, it's not traditional. It's just each circumstance is its own thing, and therefore she can seem contradictory. What I see in her is someone who thinks each issue independently and
mhm,
comes to her own conclusions. And yes, beautiful, but the mystique is in the absence of mass communication, where certain actors, singers, performers are very engaged in social media and they have a following on social media. But then you go up to the singer and say, I know you. And the singer would want to say, no, you really don't know me.
right.
Callas had what in Italian is known as the vita interiore, the inner
Mm,
life, that we all do if we pay attention. But this can be a kind of inner life that becomes the wellspring of creativity and expression. Leontine Price, to me, has that very strong vita interiore. She is very much with us in a presence and so on, but also a mystery.
right.
And I think that, to me, the artists, the creative people who are the most interesting are the ones who don't necessarily um, put it all out there. Another example, who coincided with the life of Maria Callas, unfortunately, was Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, who was very much a mystery. And she was one of the most famous women in the world, but no one really knew much about her. Even though in New York she existed in our life, and I saw her in Central Park, and I saw her at the Metropolitan Opera House, and I met her in publishing situations, and she was there, but she didn't necessarily feel that she had to show and tell everything that she was and thought. And, what we now call sharing or being spiritual or whatever was not the way of women born in the 1920s, even if they had resources and means and talent, I think.
Yes,
And
yes,
Catherine Deneuve was born probably in the 1940s in the war, but it's a similar thing. And I think, too, the people who are born in wartime experience or poverty, Jacqueline Kennedy was not born in poverty,
right,
um, but they live life differently.
right.
And many of the most fascinating figures to us in art and in life are these people, mostly women, some men, but I would say mostly women, who don't show everything, but they act on their convictions. Nelson Mandela. There's a lot we don't know about Nelson Mandela, but what we can perceive of his core is the man that we love and admire. At least I do. And I worry about opera and art nowadays when we feel we know these performers too well. And so that's why I would say Maria would not have social media and she would not allow anyone to do it on her behalf. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you make a case about it, and I totally understand what you say. Um, yeah, I mean, I can see your point of view, and but I really think that Maria Callas and performers like Maria Callas are timeless. And what I mean by that is that no matter where you live, you will always be appreciated for who you are. And that's why I thought it was important for this particular production that there was a certain staticity, because I wanted to make a contribute to all these great women, including Maria Callas, women that exist today, that they don't need to do too much to express.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
economy of gesture.
yes, yes, yes. And
But, and getting back to Gluck and Spontini, the intensity of the moment, the ability to capture dramatically, vocally, what the character is feeling fully and not just I'm upset,
Right, right.
I'm unhappy,
Yes.
but how do you bring that about? And that, even though I only saw her once at 9 years old, we know that was one of Callas's gifts.
Right.
In a way that Vittorio Gassman, for all of his talents, the histrionics sort of canceled out what could have been, he was handsome, tall, dramatic, had a wartime experience, was troubled, and, very complicated man and fascinating man. But the need to be histrionic, to me, undercut the power of some of his performances.
Absolutely, I agree. Because performers, I think, especially of certain kind of plays or operas, have to trust the text, study the text, know the text, and trust that the text will guide them to do what they have to do, to express what they have to do. And that is very important to me. It was important to me also when I was a singer. I was a character baritone. I never did main role, but I had my own place in the world, in the performing world, because I never really paid much attention on my voice as just an instrument but as more as an expression of what was happening on stage. And that's what I go for, together with I always imagine productions. I have done a lot of productions of directors that they require more acting or real acting, but I always think of these productions as many postcards put all together. You watch a postcard and you see a beautiful image, and then that image repeats itself throughout the whole 2 hours and a half of the production.
I am looking at my notes, and I find that Maria Callas sang 3 performances in the Teatro Grattacielo starting on May 12th of 1948. So
Yes.
she would have been 24 years old. And the role that she sang was Isolde.
Yes.
At the age of 20, Wagner's Isolde, at the age of 24, in Genoa, in the Teatro Grattacielo, which to me is just a phenomenal thing to think about, a 24-year-old singing Isolde, even more than a 15-year-old singing Santuzza, or a 21-year-old singing Leonora in Beethoven's Fidelio. I'm going to ask you, as a stage director and as a Greek man, as a musician and a singer, imagine and express to me what the experience must have been like for Callas, but as an audience member, to be in the ruins of Genoa in the Teatro Grattacielo, hearing this voice for the first time at the age of 24, singing Isolde, which is one of the hardest, magnificent, but hard, difficult, inscrutable roles, because what is she about? Basically, it's Elisir d'Amore.
Right.
She drinks something that she thinks will kill her, but it makes her fall in love. And she spends a lot of time, she has a scena too with Tristan in Act 2, singing for 15 minutes about love. And then there's the night watcher Brangena, who gave the medication. And then there's King Mark, who wanted Isolde. It's a lot of people standing around singing and not doing much. And probably in the Teatro Grattacielo, there was no scenery or places to do that at all in poor Italy in 1948. But time travel back 75 years or so, and tell me about this performance from your point of view of Callas as Isolde at the Teatro Grattacielo in Genova.
I imagine Callas of being very, first of all, concentrated and very precise in her preparation before, but also very non-intimidated by the magnitude of this role that she tackled, like everything else that she tackled, with a lot of force. So I imagine her being very strong on the stage. And also, I imagine the people responding to that kind of attitude. That is an attitude that when you have it, there is no way that people who sit on a chair and have paid whatever they have paid for a ticket, they cannot perceive that an artist has an interior strength that is like no other.
Mhm.
So this can take the public, it can be loved by public or can be hated. That is also something great about great artists, that not all of us will respond to them in the same way. So I imagine that in that public, many people, I'm sure they were in awe with Maria, but maybe some of them, they thought maybe that's not what they ideally wanted to hear. The magnificent part of all of this is that she was 24 years old, which is let's forget the instrument. Let's say, okay, there are instruments that they are born, developed, and all of these things that we all know about the operatic voice. The strength that takes, the inner strength to survive a performance like this is a rehearsal process, and closed with people with other cast members that I'm sure had much more experience than her.
Yeah.
So the inner strength that comes from what you said before, from being grown up in the war, and when you know that you have to do anything you can to survive and to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my little assessment.
To you, is she Maria or is she Callas?
To me, she's Maria.
Tell me why.
Because that name has a very big significance in Greece, in a Greek culture, because Maria is very celebrated, like in Italy, as the mother of Jesus. And even if you're not religious at all, that name has a special significance of somebody who is strong, who knows what they want, and who goes for it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, because I noticed you have been calling her Maria.
Yes.
Whereas most people I talk to about her call her Callas.
Yes.
And this is what I mean. If people really listen, they hear things that otherwise they don't detect. Because I call her Callas. I called her Maria to you because you were saying Maria.
Right.
But
I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because, her full name was Kalogeropoulou, which obviously she carried because who can say Kalogeropoulou out of Greece? When you grow up in Greece like me, you have, and you know that when you get out of Greece, you have to speak lots of languages so somebody can understand you. Sometimes you have to modify your names because we have those huge last names that nobody can say. So for me, because I'm Greek and I was born and raised in Greece, it's easier to say Kalogeropoulou, than to say Callas, even though it's a beautiful name. So it's easier for me to say Maria.
Mm-hmm. If we have covered everything about Callas that you would want to tell me, there's a lot more, because I have a non-Callas question for you about Greece.
Mm-hmm.
But is there anything else you want to say about Maria before we go on to my non-Callas question?
No. I think we covered everything.
Very good. I've been very lucky to go to Greece a lot and travel all over the country, practically more than most countries. It's small, but it's spread out because of the islands. I spent a lot of time in Corfu because I was researching a book about Habsburg Empire and Trieste, and the Jews of Corfu moved to Trieste, and Jewish cuisine in Trieste is called alla Corfiota, in other words, in the style of Corfu. I spent a great deal of time in Crete studying the so-called Mediterranean diet. I've been to many of the islands. The first time I ever saw the film The Sound of Music was in Athens in 1976, in Greek, and I didn't know it was The Sound of Music. It was an incredibly hot day in the summer, and I understood from the symbol that there was air conditioning in the cinema, and I didn't care what I would see. And I walked in, and it was The Sound of Music with the Austrian Alps, and it took many years for me to see The Sound of Music in English and hear the songs in English and German. But I mention this because of all the many wonderful experiences I've had in Greece. One of the ones I will never forget was arriving in the port of Navplion. Now, people who study our history know that Turkey and the Venetian Empire contested for a lot of territory in Greece. Genoa, which was the rival republic to Venice, didn't conquer Greece, but it traded a lot with Greece. The main difference between Venice and Genoa is that Genoa did diplomacy through trade. Venice would sometimes conquer. But Navplion was a Venetian port, and it's done in the Venetian style. And someone told me that inland from Navplion was the original house of Agamemnon in olive groves and orange trees, and where we thought that Agamemnon may have been, and therefore Electra, Clytemnestra, that whole funny family, were there. And for all that I've studied these operas and these plays, to stand on the ground, which may have been where Agamemnon, Electra, Orestes, that whole bunch was just, I was in tears because you feel the connection that can, I think, only happen when you're standing on the soil where these characters had their genesis, even though it was thousands of years ago. And growing up in this Greek environment as you did you ever have that experience, or did it take you going to Italy or New York or somewhere and plant your feet down and say, this is where Verdi was, this is where George Gershwin was? Did you have the experience in Greece as a Greek man or boy?
I did when I came back from Italy for the first time, because, you know, I grew up there, and I was sometimes when you grow up in a place, you don't really think about it because it's becoming everyday life. And I grew up in a place that is also full of history, but also kind of separated from everything else. Back then, in the 70s, it was very hard even to get with a car. It was all twisted roads, etc. So, but this happened to me after I had spent my first 10 years in Italy, and I went back to Greece after 10 years that I had never been, and I walked through Peloponneso. I did a trip, and that's when it hit me how much history there are on these lands. But I had also the first time that I thought that I had that feeling was in Busseto. When I went in Italy, yes, when I went as a young singer, because I used to work a lot with Fondazione Toscanini, who back then had the whole Busseto area, was doing the Festival of Verdi, etc. And because I had a love for Verdi, I just went very emotional the first time that I went into the Teatro Verdi. That was the first time that I felt a real emotion and a real connection to a place in my life. But then I experienced the same in Greece right after.
Now, Verdi didn't like the Teatro Verdi.
No.
If my memory serves, it opened in 1868 with Rigoletto, and it's sort of in the town hall of Busseto, and he grew up near Busseto and then lived in Busseto as a teenager. He was in the house of Antonio Barezzi and fell in love with Margherita Barezzi, his first wife. But he had a very ambivalent relationship to Busseto, and the Bussetani, I think they're called, had an ambivalent relationship to him because after Margherita died, and then he lived with Giuseppina Straponi, the singer, but not married for a long time. That was considered disgusting and unacceptable. And it was then that Verdi wrote La Traviata, which was the only opera he wrote that was set in contemporary times, about the hypocrisy of people. But he didn't object to their opening the Teatro Verdi in Busseto, which is a beautiful little theater, by the way. I've worked there. But it's There's an enormous statue of Verdi outside. It's like something that Lenin or Stalin or some dictator would have approved. It so big. I don't think Verdi would have approved of that statue. It's just too big.
Yeah.
It's like Abraham Lincoln in a way.
Right.
And Verdi to me is Abraham Lincoln. He's my hero, but I don't think that would have been his taste at all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the people of Busseto are capitalizing on their, national or the local celebrity.
Yeah.
Together with a very famous tenor who had a hotel
Carlo
attached.
Bergonzi, Due Foscari was the hotel.
Yes. Who was also another illustre Bussetan person from,
and he gave me a recipe for my first cookbook.
Called
Caramelle Verdi. Caramelle means caramels or candies, but what they are, this is pasta wrappers that enfold cheese or meat or whatever. But these were I made them in his kitchen, and it's in my book. Caramelle Verdi. And why Verdi? Not because of the composer, but he used spinach in the pasta, so it's green pasta.
Oh my God, you had the luck to cook with a man. He was an amazing human being. Amazing. I met him as a young artist. Yeah. He couldn't be kinder to everybody. He was just kind.
Let's talk about Carlo Bergonzi, since you knew him, and get away from the pasta for a moment.
Yeah.
His breath control.
Yeah.
Would you, as a singer, would you talk about the breath control of Carlo Bergonzi, which few people could rival?
Yeah, he came from the old school where he thought that's what, at least the few lessons as a young artist that I took with him, because I was part of of an academy in Busseto. He said that he was telling us that we have to think like a ciambella, like the breath is all over our body.
A ciambella is kind of like a donut or a life preserver.
Yes,
in other words, a round ring that goes around your middle.
Yes.
I don't think he put a donut in his mouth, but a ciambella is also an Italian cake with a hole in the middle. But it's really like a life preserver that goes around the waist.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was telling us that we have to be able to hold it down. In other words, to hold it open, to hold it down while we are singing. He had an extremely well trained instrument that you could tell every time, in every way, what he was doing, and he was millimetrically precise. That was great for him because just like many other tenors, he started as a baritone, and then he moved up, and I guess he needed to be in control of everything in order to have the career that he had. Together with that, he had a fantastic personality, just fantastic. Yeah. I remember being super scared because I was, unlike other people that were back then in Fondazione Toscanini, I came from nothing. I was just, I went for an audition and I was super scared at the beginning. And he caught it. He understood that he needed to encourage me a little bit more than the others who had already been encouraged so much by whoever they. So he really was very, very nice to me, and I will never forget that.
He also, more than most people, had very much the accent of the area.
Yeah.
In the speech. Pavarotti was from Modena nearby, so was Marilla Freni. Tibaldi was from very close by, from Salsa Maggiore, Parma, basically. But they did not. Pavarotti had a little bit the lilt, and he would extend the vowels. Freni was very precise, Tibaldi very precise, Ruggiero Raimondi precise from Bologna, Leonucci mostly precise. But Bergonzi didn't pretend. And his accent, he had that lilt of the vowels in Soma, which I can't even do.
Yeah.
He had that sh sound in his S that, Luciano would sing Quando le sere al placido, but Carlo would sing Quando le sere al placido.
Yes, it was fantastic. I want to share with you that the last 3 years of that was in Italy, I lived in Modena. because I was tired of doing back and forth Milano, whatever. And so I split the difference. I want to live in Modena. And obviously Pavarotti there was very loved and revered, just like Freni and Jaurov, who was living in Modena too, and like Kabaivanska, all these big
Yes, I'm just going to say Raina Kabayavanska, the great Bulgarian soprano, um, has lived in Modena for a very long time. And I've known young artists and not so young anymore who all went to Modena to study
Yeah.
with her. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I didn't study with any of them. I studied with Sesto Bruscantini. So I would
Mhm.
go, I would do a whole train ride for hours and hours to go to meet him once in a while when I could, because I had to work and pay my studies. Um, but they were all great people, and Bergonzi especially was one of them.
When he would sing Una fortiva lagrima, he would say, si può morir
Yes, yes.
instead of si può morir. Stefanos, not, or Stefanos, I'm going to say now.
Ah,
Koroneos, thank you very much for this conversation and for enlightening us about yourself, about the Teatro Grattacielo, about what it means to be Greek, and above all, Maria, your Maria, my Callas, and her life as a Greek artist and a Greek woman. Keep up
thank
the
you.
good work. I appreciate it. I commend people to go to Teatro Grattacielo. Is it .org?
Mhm.
Website?
Yes,
Okay,
.org.
and find out
Yes.
about your activities because it's a wonderful organization. So
Thank you so
thank
much.
you. I forgot how to say thank you in Greece. In Greek,
Ευχαριστώ.
Evkaristo, of course, Evkaristo, Evkaristo.
Thank you
And
so
until
much.
next time, thank
Thank
you.
you, Fred. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.